For nearly 2 decades, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's family was one of the most photographed in the world. 3 of the 6 children came into the family through international adoption. 3 were born biologically, and all 6 grew up moving between film sets, humanitarian trips, and eventually a divorce that played out in headlines for the better part of a decade. Magazine covers tracked their childhoods practically from birth. Record-breaking sums were reportedly paid just for first photos of the newborn twins, and each new addition to the family became global news in its own right. Now, every one of those 6 kids is a legal adult. The youngest, twins Knox and Vivian, only just turned 18 in the summer of 2026, which means for the first time ever, all 6 siblings are old enough to make their own decisions entirely independent of their parents, including decisions about the very name they carry. And nearly every one of them has used that independence the same way, quietly stepping back from the spotlight that once defined their childhood and building something that looks nothing like the version the tabloids once imagined for them. So where are Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, Knox, and Vivian now? What have they actually chosen to do with their adult lives? And what happened behind the scenes that pushed so many of them toward the same decision to leave their father's name behind? Let's go through each of their stories one at a time, and then look at the bigger picture of what tore this family apart in the first place. Maddox Chi Van was the very first child to join the family, adopted from an orphanage in Battambang, Cambodia, back in 2002, when Angelina Jolie was a single mother working as a UNHCR Goodwill ambassador. Long before Brad Pitt entered the picture, Maddox was already traveling the globe at his mother's side, and that early exposure to humanitarian work left a permanent mark on him. Now in his mid-20s, Maddox has spent the last several years reconnected with the country he was born in. As a teenager, he served as an executive producer on the historical film First They Killed My Father, which his mother directed about the Khmer Rouge era in Cambodia, and he's continued to support projects tied to Cambodian history and culture since. In 2019, he enrolled at Yonsei University in Seoul to study biochemistry, choosing a school close enough to Southeast Asia that he could stay connected to his birth country while pursuing a very different kind of career than acting. He spent years learning Korean alongside his coursework and more recently earned his pilot's license, a hobby that echoes his mother's own long-standing love of flying. Maddox hasn't fully stepped away from the family business, though. He's worked alongside his mother behind the camera on her recent films, taking on assistant director and production roles rather than performing in front of a lens, a pattern several of his siblings would later follow on the same projects. In April 2023, he joined her at a White House state dinner, one of the rare moments he's appeared publicly in a formal political setting. Dressed in a suit rather than the more casual style he's usually photographed in around campus. Friends of the family have described him over the years as someone who balances genuine academic seriousness with a willingness to experiment, whether that's with his hairstyle, his travel plans, or his choice of an entirely new continent to call home during his 20s. His move to South Korea was disrupted early on by the pandemic, which forced him to attend classes remotely from California for a period before he was able to return to campus in person. Once he was back in Seoul, he settled into a routine that combined lab work with language lessons multiple times a week, determined to build genuine fluency rather than just get by. And in the summer of 2026, Maddox joined several of his siblings in filing a legal petition to drop Pitt from his name, a decision that fits a pattern most of his brothers and sisters have followed as adults. Whatever his exact reasoning, Maddox has built an identity that revolves far more around Cambodia, aviation, and academics than around Hollywood, and he rarely gives interviews about his family at all. Zahara Marley joined the family in 2005, adopted from an orphanage in Hawassa, Ethiopia. Brad Pitt later formally adopted her as well, giving her a surname before he and Jolie were even married. Now in her early 20s, Zahara has spent her college years building a life that centers her own community rather than her family's public image. She enrolled at Spelman College, the historically black women's college in Atlanta, in the fall of 2022, with her mother visibly emotional while dropping her off on campus. The following year, Zahara joined the Mupai chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, the country's first historically black sorority, whose past members include figures like Rosa Parks. During her induction, she introduced herself using only her mother's surname, a detail that immediately drew attention online, since it was one of the first public signs that she stepped away from the Pitt name. She went on to become an active member of campus life, taking part in step and stroll performances with her sorority sisters and later serving as a big sister figure to newer members. Zahara has also used her platform for advocacy, appearing as a keynote speaker at an event in Montgomery, Alabama focused on raising awareness around period poverty, an issue she's chosen to speak on publicly rather than avoid. In her personal life, she's been in a relationship with actor and entrepreneur Elijah Cooper, who attends Morehouse College, Spelman's brother institution in Atlanta. The two were photographed enjoying a low-key date at Disneyland during her summer break, riding attractions like Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, and a log flume ride, wearing Mickey and Minnie ears like any other young couple, a striking contrast to the constant media attention of her childhood. Speculation about a possible engagement followed the outing, though nothing has been confirmed publicly by either of them. In May 2026, Zahara graduated from Spelman with a degree in psychology and a minor in educational studies, crossing the stage to the cheers of her sorority sisters, while her mother and two of her brothers, Pax and Knox, watched from the crowd. Her father was reportedly not present. Throughout her 4 years on campus, Zahara became known as a mentor figure within her sorority chapter, helping guide newer members through their own induction process the way older sisters once guided her. For a young woman whose adoption story once made international news, her college years look, by design, almost entirely ordinary. Class is sisterhood, a boyfriend, and a degree earned on her own terms. Shiloh Newell, born in Namibia in 2006, was the first biological child Jolie and Pitt welcomed together, and her birth was treated as a major media event at the time. As a child, Shiloh became the subject of near-constant speculation about her gender expression, since she preferred short hair and boyish clothing for years. As an adult, she's largely declined to revisit that chapter publicly, instead letting her creative work speak for her. On her 18th birthday in May 2024, Shiloh filed a petition to legally drop her father's surname, and the request was approved later that year without objection, making her the first of the 6 siblings to make the change official. That timing, filing on the exact day she became an adult, has often been read as a sign of just how ready she was to make the break the moment she legally could. Since then, she's poured her energy into dance and choreography, training for years at a well-known commercial studio in Los Angeles known for producing working professional dancers rather than casual hobbyists. In mid-2025, she made her debut as a choreographer under professional name Cher Jolie at a fashion industry dinner tied to designer Isabel Marin's collaboration with Net-a-Porter, staging an original piece for 2 dancers set to a live vocal performance. Then, in April 2026, she landed a role as a backup dancer in a music video for South Korean pop artist Daeon, auditioning under the simple stage name Cher, without the production team realizing who her parents were until after filming had already wrapped. For Shiloh, working under an alias and getting cast on her own merit seems to have mattered more than any connection to her famous last name, and she's continued to prioritize collaborations over interviews, letting the choreography speak for her instead. Pax Tien was adopted from Vietnam in 2007, arriving as the family's 3rd child and, in his mother's own words at the time, showing a fiercely independent streak from the start. As an adult, Pax has gravitated toward work behind the camera rather than in front of it, developing a serious interest in photography and taking on production and assistant roles on his mother's films, including her recent projects Maria and Without Blood. His path to adulthood hasn't been smooth, though. In July 2024, Pax was seriously injured in an e-bike accident in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, colliding with a car while riding without a helmet. He was taken to intensive care with a head injury and reportedly needed hip treatment as well, and his recovery involved weeks of medical care and physical therapy. His mother stayed close by his side throughout the hospitalization, and his siblings visited to offer support during the recovery. Just 6 months later, in January 2025, he was involved in a second, less serious e-bike collision in the same neighborhood, this time walking away without major injuries after briefly speaking with the other driver at the scene. Reports of additional minor bike incidents followed later that year, drawing renewed concern from fans about his safety on 2 wheels. Despite the setbacks, Pax has continued working in the film industry and has been photographed at premieres alongside his mother, including a September 2024 appearance at the Toronto International Film Festival, where the scars from his earlier accident were still visible. He's also continued developing his photography, taking behind-the-scenes stills of his mother's film sets and building a body of visual work entirely separate from acting. Unlike most of his siblings, Pax has not publicly commented on dropping the Pitt surname, and as of mid-2026, he appears to be the only one of the six who still uses it in full. Whether that reflects a more private approach to family matters or something else entirely, he hasn't addressed it, leaving the question open to speculation. Born in July 2008 in Nice, France, twins Knox Leon and Vivian Markellen were the youngest additions to the family and the last children Jolie and Pitt welcomed together before their marriage unraveled. Both turned 18 in July 2026, closing out a childhood that began with magazines reportedly paying record sums for the first photos of the newborn twins. Knox has spent his teenage years training in Muay Thai, competing in point-based tournaments around Los Angeles, and racking up wins along the way, including a title win on his 17th birthday with his mother and twin sister cheering him on from the crowd. He graduated high school in Los Angeles in June 2026, using the name Knox Jolie on his diploma, even though he hadn't yet filed any formal paperwork to change it, and capped off the day by delivering a graduation speech before heading straight to a fight that evening. His past suggests an interest in discipline and physical training rather than the entertainment industry his parents came from, and he's spoken about the sport as something that gives him structure entirely on his own terms. Vivian, his twin sister, has leaned toward theater instead. She worked as a production assistant on the 2024 Broadway revival of The Outsiders, a show her mother helped bring to the stage, and was credited in the playbill simply as Vivian Jolie. Just over a week after turning 18, Vivian filed a legal petition to formally change her name to Vivian Markellen Jolie, becoming the fourth sibling to make that switch official through the courts. Her petition described the reason as personal. That leaves Pax as the only one of the six who hasn't taken that same step. To understand why so many of these siblings chose to shed their father's name, it helps to look back at what actually happened to this family. Jolie and Pitt met on a film set in 2004, began dating shortly after, and married in 2014 at their French property, Chateau Miraval. Just 2 years later, in September 2016, Jolie filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting sole physical custody of all 6 children. The filing came days after a private flight from France to Los Angeles, during which an argument broke out between Pitt and the children. The Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services and the FBI both opened investigations into the incident. Both were ultimately closed without any criminal charges being filed against Pitt. He has denied wrongdoing throughout. Still, the confrontation became the turning point that set the divorce and years of custody litigation into motion. In a later court filing tied to a separate dispute over their French winery, Jolie alleged that a pattern of physical abuse had existed even before that 2016 flight, though she said she chose not to press charges at the time in hope that the family could recover together. What followed was one of the most drawn-out custody battles in recent Hollywood history. A privately appointed judge initially granted Pitt joint custody in 2021, only for that ruling to be thrown out the following year after Jolie's legal team successfully argued the judge had undisclosed business ties to Pitt's attorneys. The two also spent years locked in a separate legal fight over their shared winery, adding financial disputes on top of the custody battle. The divorce was finally settled on December 30th, 2024, more than 8 years after Jolie first filed, making it one of the longest-running celebrity divorces on record. Pitt later downplayed the moment in an interview, calling it something that simply came to fruition, while a representative for Jolie described her as exhausted but relieved that this chapter was finally closed. The emotional aftermath has lingered well past the paperwork. Sources close to the family have described Pitt's relationship with his adult children as largely distant in the years since, and several of the siblings have reportedly had little to no contact with him. Jolie, for her part, has spoken about her children as the anchor that carried her through the hardest years of the split, describing them in past interviews as strong-minded and thoughtful young people who handled an extraordinarily public ordeal with more grace than most adults could manage. Looking at where each of these 6 young adults has landed, what stands out isn't just that they've distanced themselves from their father's name. It's how differently each of them has chosen to process the same complicated childhood. Maddox has leaned into his Cambodian heritage and a hard science degree on the other side of the world. Zahara found her footing in a sisterhood and a college community built around advocacy. Shiloh found her voice through movement, choosing to be cast on talent alone rather than lineage. Pax has weathered real physical setbacks while quietly building a career behind the camera. And the twins, Knox and Vivian, are just beginning to define themselves, one through the discipline of the fight ring, and the other through the collaborative world of theater production. None of their paths mirror the one their parents took, and for 6 kids who spent their entire childhoods in front of cameras they never asked for, that might be exactly the point. For Jolie, watching her children step into these separate, self-directed lives seems to represent a kind of quiet win after years of legal battles and public scrutiny. For Pitt, the picture looks more distant. A father largely on the outside of the adult life his children are now building for themselves. 6 kids who were once known to the world only as part one famous. Blended family now look like 6 individuals writing 6 very different stories, each shaped by the same headline-grabbing childhood, but moving in entirely different directions. What ties them together now is a shared surname or a shared spotlight. It's a shared instinct to build something quieter and more self-directed than the childhood they were handed. Whether the distance between them and their father ever narrows again remains an open question, and none of the 6 have offered much public speculation about it either way. For now, all 6 seem far more focused on the futures they're building, in Seoul, in Atlanta, on a dance floor, behind camera, and in a ring, than on the past that made them famous in the first place.